So say goodbye and hit the road. Pack it up and disappear. You better have some place to go, 'cause you can't come back around here.
With that, welcome into the OBR Straight Talk. We are at mini camp week, so we're just going to jump right into it. Today, we're going to talk about Gerald McCoy, Desmond Harrison, three big concerns for the Browns, and at the end, we're going to talk just a little bit about what it means to be a part of the media and what is there room for as we look forward. But again, we are going directly into, and we're going to talk about a little bit about Gerald McCoy and Desmond Harrison. Again, my name is Jared Mueller. You can find me at Jared K. Mueller on Twitter. I thank you for taking time for us here at the OBR and on the Straight Talk podcast. So today we got news that Desmond Harrison was released. Those of you who are subscribers to the OBR are not surprised by this. Also, those of you who read my piece about the offensive line and worries about Greg Robinson know that there was some concerns about Desmond Harrison and whether he would even make the team. Him missing practice or being late kind of sealed the deal there, right? And so the Browns are without Desmond Harrison. And I think one of the things we have to remember and we have to learn from kind of the Desmond Harrison experience, take any of the decision-making out of last year where Hugh Jackson and Bob Wiley and Todd Haley and all of them messed around with the left tackle position all offseason, trying to figure out who was going to replace Joe Thomas, realizing A, no one replaces Joe Thomas, but B, that's maybe not a right way to kind of go about figuring out who's going to be that left tackle. And so Austin Corbett, Joel Bitonio, Desmond Harrison, all were given opportunities at the starting left tackle position. Harrison won out for the first half of the season. Greg Robinson was brought in actually in June after mini camps and then took over halfway through the season. But the Browns went through a huge process trying to figure out who was going to replace Joe Thomas, and it seems like Desmond Harrison won out, not because of what he showed on the field, but because Desmond Harrison showed upside. And I think that's going to be one of the things that Browns fans, media, the team itself, are really going to kind of, I don't know if struggle is going to be the right word, but they're going to experience a difference now that the Browns expect to be competitive. Desmond Harrison was an upside play, even though he was an old rookie. I believe he was 25 when he started last season. Even though he was an old rookie, he was this upside play. When you saw him on the field, he looked like he had all of the physical traits to be at least a capable starting left tackle. But unfortunately, as we've learned with players like Corey Coleman or Justin Gilbert, just having the physical traits doesn't mean you're going to be a very good player in the NFL. Joe Thomas talked about it in his set and long amount of tweets about Tony Grossi and Odell Beckham Jr. in the OTAs. He talked about how the offensive line and learning all of the little nuances and pieces and all of that goes with being an offensive lineman is one of the most difficult positions in the NFL. Now, there are others that can be difficult, but what he was comparing is that wide receiver is much easier to learn. You need less prep time, those kind of things, than you do at the offensive line position. Desmond Harrison never really seemed to get it. No different than Justin Gilbert never really seemed to understand how to play coverage, how to read receivers, how to put in the work in the offseason, watch tape, those kind of things. And Corey Coleman never really learned the nuances of route running. And so even though Joe Thomas talked about wide receiver and being an easier position to kind of learn the playbook, there's still a lot about being a wide receiver that is nuanced. How to use your hands, how to set up one move versus another. Corey Coleman never had that, and Desmond Harrison has shown both on and off the field that he wasn't ready to be a starting tackle or offensive lineman in the NFL. So it'll be interesting because I think this cut down to the 53 that we're going to see later in the fall is going to be one where you may see more upside talented players cut for players with maybe higher floors, so you know what you're going to get from them, but maybe lower either athletic or explosive ceilings. Because the Browns are looking for players who can contribute right now. And they made a statement about Desmond Harrison. He didn't come on time to minicamp. He was already on the roster bubble. There may have been some off-field issues this offseason. Brent Sobolewski wrote a little bit about that in our Rumor Central. So Desmond Harrison is gone. And what I think we have to be aware of is that in the near future, the Browns are going to be less and less likely to hold roster spots for players that could be, players that might be. And I think the other thing is to realize that in the NFL, it is very, very difficult to learn lots of things. Players can get better, but I'm not sure. Over the years that I've done this, I believe we're going on 10 years now in the media, looking at tape, trying to understand everything, talking to coaches, agents, those kind of things. I'm not sure there's any proof that many players kind of turn a corner. And what I mean by that is a player who isn't efficient in pass blocking at all of a sudden figures it out. Or a player who is terrible route runner or has terrible hands, all of a sudden figures it out. I think we have to start, and I have to start and be better at trusting what we see that they can do, not assuming that they can do things you haven't seen them do. With Desmond Harrison, we saw a player who wasn't technically sound as an offensive lineman. But we saw physical traits that told us maybe he could develop. Maybe he could put it all together. Counting on that, trusting in that, is no longer something the Cleveland Browns can do. Instead, the Cleveland Browns need to have players that they can do what they know they can do. And that's that. The Browns made a statement releasing Desmond Harrison. It's no longer about what you might be able to do. It's no longer about this mythical future. And it's no longer a place where you're just going to get away with things. Hugh Jackson, for all of his flaws, one of the things, players tended to like him. You rarely heard players talk poorly of him or give the next question kind of answer to things. It's because he let them do a lot of things. It looks like Freddie Kitchens has decided that's no longer how things are going to go. It's a really interesting dynamic with Kitchens. We often hear about coaches who are player-friendly and coaches who are kind of hard-line and rule-oriented. And it looks like Freddie Kitchens, based on his personality, not some effort to be something he's not, is a little bit of both. Players love him, but he holds players accountable. He's real, he's straight with, he has fun, he jokes around, he kids, he plays, he does all of those things that a players-friendly coach does, but still wants his players to do the right thing and expects it. John Dorsey, who has a track record of being okay with off-the-field issues, has always been very, very focused on the field. So Desmond Harrison not showing up on time was the on-the-field issue, no matter what the off-the-field issues are. The Browns are turning a page. Desmond Harrison is just one example of that. Unfortunately, the Browns also have to turn the page on Gerald McCoy. Now, for those of you who are subscribers, you know this, and then unfortunately the way the business works, everyone knows it at some level. Myself and Brent Sobolewski reported on, I believe it was Friday when Gerald McCoy was visiting the Browns, that he would be signing with a team. In the very, very quick, I'll just let you know, when people at 3 different levels, player, front office, and then I'll call it administration. So administration could be anything else kind of in the building, not related to the players directly as like coaching staff, those kind of things, or as the front office, kind of the rest of the level. When 3 different levels were told that he would be signing, when his behaviors, not just wearing orange, when his behaviors and things that he did or said were very apparent that he seemed to be a player for the Cleveland Browns or was ready to be a player for the Cleveland Browns. When that stuff happens and when Brett and I get different reports or the same report from different people, we put out the report. Unfortunately, it wasn't true. It wasn't accurate. Interestingly enough, I had contacts connected to the Ravens who had very, very similar interactions, expectations, discussions as the ones our sources in the Browns had. Meaning the Ravens believed they were signing him the same way the Browns did. So Gerald McCoy, whether he meant to or not, and again, I'm not bashing his character or any of those kind of things, this is his first time in free agency. Gerald McCoy had led on both the Browns and the Ravens and allowed his agent to kind of deal with the rest of it, which is fine. That's not making an excuse. My sources, who have been right about a ton of things, and again, I don't need to try to say, look how great I am, those kind of things, were wrong. They were told wrong, they were misled, all of those kind of things. But the Browns have to turn the page, and so do I. And so Gerald McCoy moves on. Here's the cool thing about, cool is probably the strong term, the good thing about Gerald McCoy moving on is he didn't move on because the Browns were terrible. He didn't move on because, or he didn't use the Browns as leverage for more money. He didn't just put on the show because they had the biggest cap space, or one of the biggest cap space. He was genuinely interested in coming to the Cleveland Browns because they were a good team on the field, and that he had belief in John Dorsey, had heard good things about Freddie Kitchens, knew of Steve Wilkes, all of those things. In the end, the Browns lost out to geography. And normally when we think about geography, we think of warmer weather, bigger cities, those kind of things. In this case, it was more about a family's comfort level. And so Gerald McCoy chose to go to Carolina, which is still, quote unquote, the South, and a place that he feels more comfortable, his family feels more comfortable. Obviously, the weather's a little bit better, and he gets to spend some time getting revenge against the Tampa Bay Bucks, who, on the day that Gerald McCoy was making his decision, gave his old number to Ndamukong Suh. So, you get it. It makes sense, whatever. He said it was all about winning, and in the end, he picked probably the worst of the three teams, unless Cam Newton's shoulder all of a sudden becomes real again, and that he can throw the ball with accuracy and some acceleration down the field. The Carolina Panthers seem to be the worst of the three teams. But the Browns have to move on. The same way they moved on from Desmond Harrison, they got to figure out what is next for the team. What we know is that Gerald McCoy was a special case. What I mean by special case is the Browns weren't out hunting for a defensive tackle, per se. Gerald McCoy became available and is a great player who plays defensive tackle. The Browns, listen, if a player of Gerald McCoy's talent became available at pretty much every position besides wide receiver and quarterback. Quarterback is obviously they have Baker Mayfield, and wide receiver because that player probably wouldn't be that interested with the depth that the Browns have. And the Browns probably don't want to disrupt the apple cart or put more money into the wide receiver position, already paying Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. a lot of money. Besides those two positions, if a player of Gerald McCoy's talent became available, edge rusher, linebacker, cornerback, safety, offensive lineman, obviously, tight end, maybe not running back, but maybe. We know about all the Duke Johnson drama. If the Browns could bring in a quality running back and move on from Duke Johnson, then Kareem Hunt comes back halfway through the season, great. But the Browns saw Gerald McCoy as a special case. So they took their shot. They didn't make it. Does that mean the Browns have a desperate need at defensive tackle? Does that mean the Browns are now lacking because they didn't sign Gerald McCoy? I'm going to talk about the defensive tackle position at the end of the show, but one of the things to be clear is Gerald McCoy was special. And so the Browns didn't plan on Gerald McCoy. They brought in Sheldon Richardson. They have some other players in the middle. Gerald McCoy wasn't a part of the plan. He wasn't a need per se. Would it have been great to have that type of talent as a backup rotational piece with Sheldon Richardson and Larry Ogunjobi? Absolutely. But missing out on Gerald McCoy isn't going to define the season. What might define the season are the three big concerns that I have for the team. We'll get into those right after the question of the day. Again, guys, I like bringing out the question of the day because, again, it gives me an opportunity to share a little bit about myself, but it also gives me an opportunity to reach out to you guys and try to gather information about the people that I engage with. And so the question of the day is very, very simple. I like food. Sometimes I'm going to do my food segments on here. No matter what Paul Spencer says, I will do my food segments here and there. But today's all about, what is your game day snack? So what is it that on game day, if there was a game today, besides us all being really pumped about it, what would that snack be? For me, it's two. I know I'm cheating a little bit, but it's my question I get to. It's two. The first is a savory. My wife used to, and now it's mine, make this taco dip, which is basically a pound of beef, browned, seasoned, a pound of cream cheese, softened, right on top of that, a good chunk or portion of salsa, whatever you like, and then a pound of shredded cheddar cheese. Throw that bad boy in the oven, let it all kind of melt together. You get this beefy, creamy salsa cheese. This combo is just amazing. There's nothing healthy about it. Well, beef is good for you. Cheese has some protein. But in general, nothing greatly healthy about it. But when I think of game day, having the ability to just kind of dive into that, the other option is to put it in a crock pot. Because in a crock pot, you can just dip into it the whole game. The other for me, again, many of you know that my wife has a bakery, and so she has something called a triple threat brownie, but any brownie that she makes, she has a tuxedo brownie, which is basically a chocolate brownie with this vanilla frosting type stuff, and then a ganache of chocolate on top, or her triple threat, which is normally a chocolate chip cookie, peanut butter icing, and a chocolate brownie on top. That is my dessert game day snack. What is yours? Hit us up on Twitter at the OBR, or you can get a hold of me at Jared K. Mueller. That's JaredKMuellar. Use the hashtag QOTD and let us know, what is your game day snack? So now that I have shared with you my snack of the day, which is all positive and delicious and healthy and all that kind of stuff, we come into kind of our final segment for today, and that is looking at the three biggest concerns that I have for the Cleveland Browns going into the 2019 season. Listen, this is not to be contrarian or focus on the negatives. Those of you who know me have known that for a long time. I have been the ultimate Browns and Cleveland sports fan optimist, but it also is realistic to make sure that we're talking about what is important. And so we're going to start kind of where we started this podcast today, not with Linkin Park, which, by the way, both musical bumps were both from Linkin Park, from their CD, which was a good album, whatever they're called now, which I enjoyed both of those. And so, but we're going to start at the offensive line. So we talked about Desmond Harrison being released. And just to be honest, I think too often we as fans, media, those kind of things, get so drawn to where the ball is. When you watch a game on TV, you rarely get to see what's going on the offensive and defensive lines. You honestly rarely get to see a lot of what's happening in the middle of the field unless that's where the ball goes. Where you really get to see is the quarterback, the running back, the wide receivers, the cornerbacks, and then at times the linebackers and safeties, which you don't see too often unless there's a sack, which again involves the ball, right? We have created a society, camera angles and views and all kinds of things. Not that anybody's doing anything on purpose or any conspiracy theories, but we've created a society where the ball is all that matters. Fantasy football also plays a role in that, where the ball is all that matters. You don't get any points for a good block. Now, if there's a cool pancake block or, something that sets up the ball to go down the field, those things can be highlighted at times. But in general, much like baseball used to talk about, chicks love the long ball. In the NFL, people love the ball, period. Wherever it's going, that's where people are focused. But when you talk to coaches, when you hear coaches talk, they're almost always coming right back to the offensive and defensive lines. It's at those positions that people tend to underestimate the value, where coaches, general managers, those kind of things, really tend to focus a lot of energy. Unfortunately for the Browns, this offseason, the offensive line arguably has gotten worse and may have gotten far worse. So let's start at the tackles. Greg Robinson was re-signed for 1 year. My article on the OBR talks about whether or not the Browns have a replacement for him, if anything should happen, or if they need to replace him. And one of the things I focused on there is, while the last 8 games, fans were excited and thought the Browns got a steal in Robinson, when you look at the number of penalties, and again, the Pro Football Focus grade, even if you don't love that, if you look at how Baker Mayfield had to play, you saw that Greg Robinson wasn't all that great. He wasn't even really that good. Instead, Freddie Kitchens' play calling and Baker Mayfield's ability to escape the pocket, and honestly, Greg Robinson's ability to get a penalty called on him, allowed him to look better than he did. Because, well, if there's 0 or 1 sack allowed, that's pretty good for 8 games for a left tackle. Sure, but when you take into account 10, 11, 12, 13 penalties, and Baker Mayfield scrambling for his life, all of a sudden, Greg Robinson doesn't look all that good. I don't think Greg Robinson is. I'm not saying that he's deserving of being cut like he was in St. Louis and in Detroit and was still available in June last year when the Browns signed him after minicamp. What I am saying is that Greg Robinson isn't a reason to be excited about the Browns offensive line, and that's your left tackle. On the right side, you have Chris Hubbard, who I can say pretty confidently was a Todd Haley signing last year. Haley brought in as the offensive coordinator, which was, whoever wants to argue, it was a John Dorsey decision with Hugh Jackson saying, all right, fine, great, I still have Al Saunders, Bob Wiley, I have my staff, I'll just bring in Todd Haley, great. One of the things Dorsey did for Todd Haley, and it's not to say Chris Hubbard wasn't a quality free agent, he wasn't what he was paid to be, and the idea that he is just assumed to be the right tackle starter should be cause for concern for many Browns fans. Much like Greg Robinson, Hubbard hasn't proven that he is good to great on a team that should value keeping Baker Mayfield upright. Can Mayfield make plays with his feet and get out of pressure and manipulate the pocket and keep his eyes downfield and make big plays? Absolutely. Do the Browns have a running game with Nick Chubb, Duke Johnson, Kareem Hunt later, and even Hilliard that can take some pressure off the offensive line? They can just kind of go downhill and maul? Sure, absolutely. But in the end, much like Andrew Luck, do the Browns really, are they okay with going into this season, and maybe even next season, with 2 tackles who haven't proven much of anything? All Chris Hubbard did last year was stay healthy. He played okay, but no one would say Chris Hubbard is any resemblance to what Mitchell Schwartz gave the Browns. Talk about a player that I'm sad the Browns lost out on for all the different reasons that was. So starting at the tackle positions, anyone going into the 2019 season with confidence that Greg Robertson and Chris Hubbard are going to be fine, good, or great at the tackle positions are generally betting on one of 2 things, maybe a third. The first is just general development, that Greg Robertson and Chris Hubbard, even though they've been in the league for a few years, are going to get better. It's possible. I know a lot of people like the offensive line coach Campen. Did a lot of great work in Green Bay. But again, like I talked about with Desmond Harrison, assuming people are going to get better, planning on people getting better, planning on players developing, that is something I'm no longer willing to do for this team. So you're either thinking development, or you're thinking Freddie Kitchens and Todd Monken are going to develop an offense that will make things easier for the tackles. That's very, very possible. Or you think Baker Mayfield's ability to make things happen and the weapons around him will make up for those tackle positions. Here's the thing about all three of those. First, it's unrealistic to just expect jumps in development. It's possible, but it's semi-unrealistic. The other two have nothing to do with the tackles. So it's not that you're confident about Greg Robinson and Chris Hubbard. Your confidence would be coming from Freddie Kitchens, Todd Monken, and Baker Mayfield. And so we're going into a season where the hope is that they'll compete for the playoffs, a division title, AFC title, the Super Bowl. It's hard to go into that believing and having confidence in the Browns' tackles. But that's only 2 of the 5 positions on the offensive line. Left guard, Joel Bitonio, he's great. There's really not much else you can say about Joel Bitonio. He's great for the media. He's great in the community. He's just a great football player. He's seen a lot of instability. He really is replacing Joe Thomas as the anchor of the Cleveland Browns offensive line. Whether or not, I'm not saying he's Joe Thomas, but Joel Bitonio really does kind of have that 10, 15-year vet. He is a Cleveland Brown long-term kind of guy to him. He's been great. J.C. Tretter in the middle. The only big concern about him is injury. He's had ankle issues and some other issues, but has been a very, very good center. So left guard and center, so far so good. I don't have any concerns about left guard and center. The problem is, I've already told you my concerns about tackle. Offensive line, again, like a chain, all about its weakest link. So is it Greg Robinson? Is it Chris Hubbard? Or might it be Austin Corbett? We know he's gone back and forth from starting at right guard to second team center to get some experience there, again, possibly because of J.C. Tretter's injury history. But is Austin Corbett ready to step in to Kevin Zeitler's role? We know John Dorsey made a decision, and the way it ended up being presented was the Browns traded Kevin Zeitler for Olivier Vernon. Basically a swap that said another edge rusher was more important than the right guard. In a vacuum, I would agree with that. Finding a right guard should be much easier than finding a very good or a good edge defender. Outside of the vacuum, John Dorsey made that decision knowing what his tackle position looked like, and at some level seemed to be making that decision because he spent a second-round pick on Austin Corbett. We really don't know what Corbett has to offer. He didn't look good at his rookie season, but assuming someone's rookie season is exactly how he's going to look isn't great. Could he get better? He was a good prospect coming out of Nevada. He wasn't a perfect prospect, but most people had him as a second or a third round prospect behind a few other guys, especially on the interior like Will Hernandez. But he was a good prospect coming out of Nevada. He had good film. He had good tape as a left tackle. And the NFL has to move inside, and at this point he's actually switching sides of the ball, which doesn't seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but it is to offensive linemen. It's not akin to changing which hand you write with, but it's closer to that than easy and simple. So Austin Corbett has the tape, has everything we think could be a talented right guard. We just haven't seen it. So again, you're trusting a player that you have been given zero reason to believe in. Unless you just believe in John Dorsey. Unless you're giving a lot of weight to his college tape at a far different position against far inferior competition. Is it possible that Austin Corbett is going to step in and be 75-80% of Kevin Zeitler? Yes, that's very much possible, because right guard isn't the same value as, again, an edge rusher, tackle position, those kind of things, because you generally can have help from center. The thing that the right guard, again, if that's Corbett, if that's Callis, whoever is going to be at right guard, the thing that they will often benefit from is that Joel Bitonio is less likely to need help from J.C. Tretter. And so Tretter can often be directly responsible to support that right guard or that right side of the offensive line versus shading to the left side. But so far, we can feel very, very confident in 2 of the 5 Browns offensive line positions. And we should feel very, very unsure of the other 3. On a team that needs to keep Baker Mayfield healthy, that should be everyone's number 1 concern going into the season. The second I'll spend less time on is very simple. Freddie Kitchens has never done this. I am on record that I love Freddie Kitchens. He is a transparent, authentic person. Like I talked about earlier, he is a good combination of player-friendly and accountability and discipline. He has all of that going on. I think highly of how he treats the players. I don't love that he is going to hold on to play calling. I've never liked that for first-time head coaches. I think he has a great offensive coordinator. Maybe during training camp, maybe during the season, he's going to hand over play calling duties to Todd Monken. But besides that, there's nothing about Freddie Kitchens that concerns me about who he is. What concerns me is he's just never done this. And so a team with high expectations, a team with a lot of personalities, which Freddie Kitchens has his, and to be honest, a team that's got a lot going on. With an offense that is going to be creative and have things going here, there, and everywhere, with a new defensive coordinator and Steve Wilks bringing in a more zone-heavy, and when I say heavy, in Wilks' history, number 1 in the league zone-heavy kind of defense. We'll see how that plays out with Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams being far better as man-press coverage players. But with all that going on, Freddie Kitchens has to manage a game. Freddie Kitchens has not only manage a game, he has to manage egos. And so there's just a lot on his plate. Now, he's brought in some veteran coaches that I think are going to be very, very helpful to him. But my concern with Freddie Kitchens, this is just his first time. Does that mean he's automatically going to screw it up? No. Do I have anything to go off of how well he's going to do as a head coach? I don't. All we have is, as an offensive coordinator for 8 games last year, Freddie Kitchens called a very, very good offense. Unfortunately, the same skills needed to be an offensive coordinator aren't always the same skills needed to be a good head coach, and vice versa. Being a good head coach doesn't always mean that you are a great coordinator. Unfortunately, Freddie Kitchens is number 2 on my list of concerns, not because he's struggled, but because we have nothing to go off of whether or not he can be a good head coach. And there's a lot going on, both in game day management, ego management, media management, and everything in between. So Freddie Kitchens is my number 2 concern going into the Cleveland Browns season. If I can pause there for a second, it's kind of nice that Freddie Kitchens is my number 2 concern going into the Browns season. And finally, my number 3, we already hit on a little bit with the Gerald McCoy news, but that is the Browns' defensive tackle depth and how they use players there. Again, the Browns have 2 very good starting defensive tackles. Larry Ogunjobi is going to play a little bit more of that 0-1 technique, where Sheldon Richardson is going to be that penetrating 3 technique, but they can play a little bit all over the place. My concern isn't that they have good starters. My concern is that their backup depth isn't something that I feel great about. And so besides those 2, you're really looking at the next best players being players that can move inside. Myles Garrett, Olivier Vernon, Chris Smith, Anthony Zettel. Those are some players that are going to probably man some minutes on the inside of the Browns defensive line. Is that going to be okay? Those players are fine. There's some talent there. I mean, the idea of having Sheldon Richardson and Myles Garrett on the inside and Jannard Avery and Olivier Vernon on the outside is scary for an opposing quarterback. But what about the Baltimore Ravens? And if we can be really honest, something that's not being talked a lot about, what about the Pittsburgh Steelers? And what I mean by that is the Baltimore Ravens have gone old school. They want to run the ball. What happens when Sheldon Richardson and Larry Ogunjobi need breaks? Because big guys like that need breaks. What happens when they need breaks and the best alternative is to bring in smaller defensive end types like Chris Smith? What happens when they run it down their throats? And then the linebackers aren't getting protected by their defensive tackles like generally you want them to be. And so then they struggle or they try to take extra angles or try to cheat a little bit. And then Lamar Jackson pulls the ball and is off to the races. The Pittsburgh Steelers lost Le'Veon Bell, lost Antonio Brown. Really, James Conner was okay last year as a running back. They really have Ben Roethlisberger and Juju Smith-Schuster. And then some other guys. So would it be crazy to think they might go old school and try to run the ball? That they might go old school and try to run the clock and allow Ben to make big plays late? It's possible. And again, you run into the same problem because the Steelers actually have a pretty good offensive line like the Ravens. If they go old school and try to pound the ball, what do the Browns do? How do they deal with that? One way they deal with that is their offense. One of the things that the Browns, the fans, and media are counting on is that the Browns' offense is going to be electric. So one of the ways that the Browns can combat one of their weaknesses, which is the defensive tackle depth and how they use those players against teams that want to run the ball, start scoring the ball. The more they score, the less the other team's going to run. And so I think the Browns have made a decision. Similar, again, I always bring up the Peyton Manning Colts. Their defense with Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis, and even Bob Saunders were really set up because they knew Peyton Manning was going to score. And so they were all about getting after the passer and then having Sanders running all over the place in the backfield or on the defensive backfield. So if Baker Mayfield in the offense, even with the somewhat concerning, very concerning offensive line, if that can go well, if they can keep scoring, then maybe the defensive tackle depth isn't that important. The problem becomes is if the Ravens and Steelers can control the game, or whoever else. We saw it with the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl and their run to the Super Bowl. They controlled the game with their run game. Even though they had Tom Brady, it was their running game that got them there. So what happens when the Browns come up against the Patriots, come up against the Steelers, come up against the Ravens, come up against other run-heavy teams? Heck, the Carolina Panthers are probably going to continue to be a pretty run-heavy team. How do they deal with that with limited depth of proven players on the defensive in the defensive tackle position? Again, offensive line, something that at some level the Browns have had a solid to good to great offensive line over the years. Again, the Joe Thomases, Joel Bitonio, Alex Mack, Mitchell Schwartz, John Greco. They've had offensive linemen over the last decade that have been very, very good. For the first time, that's a big concern. We know that Freddie Kitchens, Todd Monken, and Baker Mayfield can help deal with some of that. Freddie Kitchens' inexperience being the number 2 concern, and then depth at the defensive tackle position, which, if the Browns' offense takes off like we expected, won't be as important. If those are the 3 biggest concerns, and I believe they are, I believe those are the Browns' 3 biggest concerns going into the 2019 season. Really only one of them is significant, and that's the offensive line. It can prove me wrong. Greg Robinson can be average. Chris Hubbard can be average. Austin Corbett can be 75 to 80% of Kevin Zeitler, that could be good enough. That would be good enough, to be honest. But that is the big concern. Freddie Kitchens, he just has to continue to be himself, and he has to learn and he has to grow. He has to be flexible. He has to be willing. If he needs to turn over play calling duties, if he needs someone else to be in charge of timeouts and whatever that is, he's got to be willing to do that. So far, he's shown that that's the type of coach he is. We get to find out what kind of head coach he is this season and hopefully over the next decade or two. And then defensive tackle, again, if the Browns offense scores the way we think they will, the defensive tackle depth is not as big of a concern. You can run a lot of defensive end type players out there. You can go into different versions of nickel, whether that's with 3 safeties, keeping 3 linebackers on the field at times, and only having 3 defensive linemen. Lots of things you can do. It's still a concern because the Ravens, the Steelers, the Patriots, and other teams can go run heavy, which will take the Browns' offense off the field and expose the defensive tackle depth limitations. All in all, not a terrible set of concerns going into the 2019 season, no matter what the media says. And with the media is where we're going to end tonight. Listen, you've all seen the Tony Grossi, OBJ, Joe Thomas, all of that kind of stuff. If you followed me for a long time, you know that on my previous podcast that I used to host, that I went in on Mary Kay Cabot. I have concerns when people with large audiences tends to try to push narratives that facts don't seem to back up. It is a big concern I have in sports, and to be honest, if I followed politics and the things that are way more important in this world, I'd probably have bigger concerns than the sports ones. But the real question becomes is that ever going to change? And honestly, my thought is it's not going to, for a variety of reasons. Those of you listening to this podcast, those of you who follow me on Twitter, you are in the minority. And I don't just mean in the minority because you follow me. Those of you who are active into podcasts and active into Twitter are the minority when it comes to the quote-unquote paying audience. The paying audience pays one way or the other. You either pay with your time or you pay with your money. The time it takes to watch a 15-second video, the time it takes to close all of the ads so you can actually read the article, or the money it costs to subscribe to the OBR or to The Athletic or whoever else is charging. If you want to get text messages from some people, you can pay some money to do that, I believe. But in the end, you are the minority. I am the minority. Facebook is far closer to the majority. And if you ever go onto Facebook's comment sections of anything related to the Cleveland Browns, you're going to hear and you're going to see more people supportive, more people on board with that type of media coverage, more people who were born and raised with those people who have been around for a long time. And so while we may think that they aren't covering the team properly, if they continue to get clicks, if they can continue to get the loyalty that people give them, they're going to sustain. It's just the reality. Until the niche or niche, depending on how you pronounce that, until the niche people are the majority, it's going to be difficult to get different types of coverage to be the majority, to be the front and center. Listen, for OBR subscribers, I put a note in about something I directly overheard at OTA last week, in the media scrum, something that should concern you. I will tell you, we had a question posed to Jake Burns, who was there as a part of the OBR and Cleveland.com for minicamp, and the question was about, do certain media members get better front row, whatever, at press conferences? And if they're the seated ones inside, yes, they're assigned seats. That's where they sit. That's where they're allowed to sit. But I can tell you that at those media scrums, some of the majority major big players, the names, will walk right in front of anybody else to be right in front. You'll never see those people behind anyone because they will walk in front of anyone and everyone to be in the front. I'm not just calling out those two people. There are a few more that will do that. And so how do you deal with that? How do you deal with a media if you're a part of the niche group that listens to this podcast? If you're part of the niche group that is getting their information from Twitter, if you're part of the niche group that is on the OBR forums and one of our subscribers, how do you deal with that? It's tough. You can ignore it. You can try to ignore it. You can put your money where your mouth is. You can not click on their links and hope that somebody else covered that story, that information. You can not respond to them so that their Twitter analytics doesn't show them getting a lot of retweets, quote tweets, whatever. You can subscribe to those that you believe in. But in the end, it was a conversation. It was an interesting conversation last night with Doug, and I can't pronounce his last name correctly. I won't. But Doug Lesmeris, whatever it is, from Cleveland.com, who really does a great job, primarily covering the Buckeyes, but some Cleveland Browns. Jake, Brendan Leister, John Stevenson, one of our guys as well, Brent Sobolewski. And that is that there is a niche market for understanding route running, coverage, defensive backs, defensive tackles, all of that kind of stuff, which continued into today, where TA, to be honest, I have no idea his actual name, but on Twitter, he does a lot of betting and a lot of other things. Really a solid guy who I follow at CLEVTA. But he basically said it's a niche market. So the question becomes is, will things like film breakdown ever become quote unquote popular? And my answer to you is no. I think one of the things that I can do a better job of, and you can do a better job of, is realizing that. I just gave 5 minutes of my podcast to talk about a media group that I want to pay less attention to. But it's difficult because you can't be frustrated. You can be frustrated by their coverage and how they influence the narrative and how they influence the majority. But realizing that whatever that we group is, that niche group, the people focused on coverage and leverage and shading and techniques and blocking and all of that, are less likely to ever influence the majority. Instead, appreciating all of you, and I mean this, I appreciate all of you that take time to listen to this podcast. I appreciate all of you that take your money and your time to be subscribers at the OBR. I appreciate all of you that just want to interact on Twitter. Remember the question of the day. Remember, I want to know what your game day snack is. So again, send that to us at the OBR or me at Jared K. Mueller, JaredKMueller. Tell me what your snack of the day is, hashtag QOTD. But again, we just need to appreciate you. And I hope you guys appreciate us. Because our goal, whoever that we is, some of those people I named aren't a part of the OBR. They're just good at what they do. They provide quality content. They provide content that is, as much as possible, bereft of narrative and just information and analysis. They're great people. My plan is to have some of the people that maybe you've never heard of on this podcast, whether that's Mac Robinson and Jack McCurry, or even my buddy Jeff Lloyd, who took over the Locked On Browns podcast from me. I plan to have a lot of those people on here because you are that niche market, but you're my market. You're our market. And we are all one big team together. And we get to support a team that has a few concerns, but for once in our lives has realistic expectations that they could make the playoffs. And as a sports fan, can't ask for anything better. So until next time, again, follow us at the OBR. You can follow me at Jared K. Mueller. That's JaredKMueller. Thank you for stopping by the Straight Talk podcast. Have a great day and go Browns.